So, picture this. 1 minute you're in Manhattan, probably doom scrolling or grabbing a latte, and the next, you're flat on your back on the cold stone steps of the Acropolis. It's 440 BC. The skyscrapers are gone, the yellow cabs are gone, and that humid New York summer is replaced by this dry, vibrating heat. It hits your senses all at once. It's not just the sun, though, it's the smell. Sea salt, freshly sliced marble, and a heavy, earthy scent of crushed olives. And the noise. Man, the noise is something else. It's this constant clink, clink, clink of thousands of chisels carving out the Parthenon, mixed with the roar of 1,000 guys arguing their heads off down in the Agora. You look around and see everyone in white linen, moving like they actually give a damn. In 2026, democracy is just a thing on the news, right? But here, these people think they own the place. They aren't subjects. They're users in the world's first real smart city. You're standing there with your NYC medical degree and your engineering brain, looking at the Piraeus harbor like it's a giant router bringing in data instead of just grain. You're the sleeper, the ghost in their system. And you realize Pericles' big dream is about to get a massive 21st century software update. The real fun starts when they haul you into this rich guy's house. There's a local doctor there, nice enough guy, but he's basically guessing. He's looking at this guy with a nasty fever and nodding, yep, too much yellow bile, definitely the humors. To everyone else, he's a genius. To you, it's just pre-microbial mythology. Now, you can't just start shouting about bacteria or viruses. Do that, and they'll kick you out of the city for being a sorcerer or worse. You gotta be smart. You play the game. You start talking their language, but with a twist. You tell them the fever isn't some fluid leak. It's a metabolic fire. The body's just cranking up the heat to burn out these invisible seeds of balance that snuck in from the outside. You show them that the life force, oxygen, actually rides the blood like a highway. It doesn't travel through air tubes and the arteries like they thought. Then you lay down the sleeper's clinical triage. You're teaching them to check the strength of the pulse and pinch the skin to see if the guy's dried out. Simple stuff, really. Boil the water. You tell them, cleaned water fuels the internal recovery engine. You grab some of that local honey and propolis and call a biological shield from the gods to stop the rot. It sounds like poetry to them, but it's just solid science. Next thing you know, you've basically kick-started a medical reformation. You've turned the whole Hippocratic vibe into a clinical powerhouse. Watching those Athenians get back on their feet, people who thought they were cursed, you realize you've given the city a kind of biological backbone. You're the master of the clinical pulse now, making sure their ideas live long enough to actually change the world. Pretty wild for a day's work, isn't it?
So it's 435 BC and I'm standing on this big dusty rock called the Nix. This is where the whole Athenian assembly meets to vote. Now, coming from NYC, I'm used to thinking about stuff like fiber optics and data bandwidth, right? But here, the network is just 6,000 dudes in a stone amphitheater, all screaming at the top of their lungs. They're trying to decide on big stuff like, hey, should we build more ships or just go pick a fight with Sparta? But here's the problem. It's a total noise fest. The guys down front are losing their voices, and the poor folks in the back can't hear a lick of the data being tossed around. It was a mess. So I put my physics brain to work. I told the architects, look, you gotta bounce the sound. We rigged up these massive curved bronze reflectors behind the speaker stand. Then I had tweak the seating into a semi-parabola. Think of it like a giant satellite dish made of people. Suddenly, the signal is hitting every voter's ears loud and clear. But then I saw how they actually voted. Usually it was just a bunch of hands going up in the dark. Talk about data corruption. If your boss or some scary neighbor is watching you, you're gonna vote how they want, right? Peer pressure is a beast. So I introduced the hardware ballot. I showed him how to use these little bronze discs. Some had a solid center, some had a hole. You just feel the hole with your thumb, keep your hand covered, and boom, secret ballot. Nobody knows your business. In 2026, we call that privacy. Here, it's just making sure the system doesn't glitch. Now every system's got bugs. In Athens, the bugs are the guys who want to be kings. They had this thing called ostracism where they'd vote to kick a guy out of town for 10 years. It's basically their version of an antivirus. But people were cheating, faking the pottery shards, the ostracons, or double counting them. I gave them what I call the sleeper's checksum. I told the big shots to standardize the shards. Every voter gets a piece of pottery with a specific weight and feel issued by the state, I said. It made forging them in bulk pretty much impossible. Then I took it a step further, started teaching him some network analysis. We'd track the influence networks in the Agora. You know who's talking to who's buying up all the favors. We were catching tyrants before they even knew they were tyrants. By the time I was done, Athens wasn't just a city. It was a secure firewall. It wasn't just protected by stone walls, but by this pottery code that kept the system from crashing. Sitting there in the Agora with the city humming around me, it felt just like a busy morning in Manhattan. I'd basically turned the Athenian kernel into the most stable OS in history. Pretty cool for a guy with no Wi-Fi, huh?
So it's 433 BC. I'm standing on the docks at the Piraeus, the heart and soul of the Athenian navy. Right in front of me is the Olympias, one of those massive triremes. Now, back in Manhattan, you think of a motor as something made of steel, fuel injectors, and spark plugs, right? But here, the motor is 170 free citizens sitting on 3 levels of wooden benches. It's a literal biological power plant. These guys are proud, too. They're rowers, not slaves, but they were hitting a wall. Total desync. I watched them for a bit during a practice run. The problem was obvious. They were rowing with their arms. You do that, and your muscles turn to lead in 20 minutes flat. I had to pull the rowing master, the keelyists, aside. I told him, look, you gotta treat the body like a series of levers. I showed the men how to use their legs and hips to drive the oar, really putting their weight into it. I even had them focus on stabilizing the shoulder area, specifically su chemagen surus and daki sakini, to make sure the pull was clean and didn't wreck their joints. Once they started using their glutes and lower backs, the workload shifted to the big muscle groups. Total game changer. But the heat was the real killer. These guys were sweating buckets and drinking plain water, which just flushes out all your salt. They were cramping up left and right. So I got the quartermasters to whip up what I call the sleeper's electrolyte brew. Just a mix of water, sea salt, honey, and a splash of barley water. It's basically ancient Gatorade. Keeps the electrical signals and the muscles firing. Suddenly, you got 170 guys moving like one single synchronized processor. The ship hits 10 knots, and it's smooth. Quiet, too. No splashing, just pure rhythmic power. Then I took a look at the ship itself. Down in the dry docks, everyone's staring at that big bronze ram on the prow, like it's just a metal tooth for smashing holes. To me, that's a kinetic penetrator. The old design was pushing this massive bow wave that just dragged the ship down. I showed the shipwrights how to tweak the curve of the hull underwater. The idea was to create a counterwave that cancels out the resistance. Streamlining, plain and simple. And the ramming part? Usually, hitting another ship at full speed is a gamble. You might break your own ship's nose in the process. I had the bronzesmiths cast these internal ribs into the ram. It distributes that massive impact force across the entire wooden keel. Force dissipation, baby. Now, the trireme isn't just a boat. It's a high-speed projectile. The result? It's basically science fiction for these guys. The Athenian fleet doesn't just fight anymore. They maneuver like modern destroyers. Watching them pull off a Deke Plus, that's their breakthrough move. With that kind of speed, it's terrifying. I'm sitting there on the stone pier, and the smell of tar and salt hits me, making me think of the NYC waterfront for a second. I realized right then that I'd turned the Athenian Navy into a data-driven predator.
So get this. It's 438 BC and I'm standing right there on the Acropolis. The Parthenon is almost finished, and let me tell you, it's a trip. Back in Manhattan, we're used to those perfectly straight glass towers. The Seagram Building, Hearst Tower. You know the vibe. But here, these architects, Ictinus and Callicrates, were losing their minds trying to build the perfect temple. The problem was, the more they tried to make it straight, the worse it looked to the human eye. The human brain is a funny thing, man. If you build a long horizontal line perfectly flat, it looks like it's sagging in the middle. If those columns are dead vertical, they look like they're leaning away from you. It's a total visual meltdown. So I stepped in with a little 2026 perspective. I told him, listen, you gotta hack the brain to please the eye. I showed the master masons a trick called antiseptics. Basically, you don't make the column a straight cylinder. You give it a tiny little swell in the middle, just enough to make it look like it's holding weight. Then we curved the whole floor, the stylobate, upward just a few centimeters at the center. It's basically UI optimization, but with 5-ton blocks of marble. We even tilted the columns inward just a hair to correct that perspective distortion when you're looking up. To the brain, it looks rock solid and perfect. To the tape measure, it's a mess of intentional errors. But man, when that sunset hits the Pentelic marble, it glows. It's the world's first high-resolution building. But look, a city can't just be pretty temples. The people, the demos, they need infrastructure. So I headed up to the quarries at Mount Pentelicus. In NYC, we take mass production for granted, right? Standardized bricks, I-beams, the works. Out here, though, every single chunk of marble was a custom job. It was a logistical nightmare. Moving those 10-ton blocks down the mountain was slow, dangerous work. I introduced what I call the modular sled. I showed the quarry masters how to use standardized runners and a pulley reduction system that cut the human labor in half. Then I got the masons on board with preset dimensions. I told them, let's make these blocks plug and play, so we can just slot them into the harbor walls. To really grease the wheels, we started using powdered limestone mixed with water on the wooden tracks. It creates this high-pressure fluid film. Basically, the stones started gliding down the mountain. I turned that rugged quarry into a modern industrial production line. Before I knew it, Athens was getting reskinned in marble at a pace that would have made a midtown developer's head spin. Sitting in the Agora now, with all that white dust in the air, it honestly feels just like a construction site in the middle of a NYC morning. I realized I'd taken the classic beauty of Greece and synced it up with that Manhattan efficiency. I'd made the Athenian blueprint the most scalable model in history. Not too shabby for a guy out of his own century, right?
Man, for 30 BC was a rough one. The Peloponnesian War had just kicked off, and everyone, and I mean everyone, from the countryside had scurried behind the long walls of Athens for safety. It was a total pressure cooker. Hot, sticky, and way too many people packed into one spot. Then the plague hits. Hard. Folks are dropping like flies, and the historians like Thucydides are freaking out, calling it divine wrath. But me? I'm sitting there thinking about my time back in NYC, and I'm seeing a massive public health disaster. I started doing some old-school contact tracing. Number 2026 tech, obviously, but I showed the big shots how to map the spread. It didn't take long to see the sickness was hitching a ride to the shared water and those cramped shacks near the Piraeus. I didn't use any fancy jargon, though. I just told them, look, it's not the gods. It's these invisible seeds of rot jumping from one guy to the next. We set up what I called a hygiene firewall. We had everyone using vinegar and honey to scrub down their hands and their homes. We started moving the sick into recovery camps outside the main living areas. Classic social distancing, before it was a thing. And the big one, boiling the water. I told them, fire kills the seeds. Simple, right? We didn't stop the plague entirely, but we flattened that curve. Athens survived the siege with its social gears still turning. But the sickness wasn't the only thing spreading. Panic was eating the democracy alive. Rumors in the Agora were flying faster than the plague itself. And people were looking for someone to blame. I had to pull Pericles aside and tell him, listen, transparency is the only antidote to this kind of fear. We turned the town criers, the Carricks, into a daily information hub. We put out standardized reports. How many were sick, how much grain was left, what the defense plan looked like. No fluff, just the data. Then we got M doing public rituals to resync everyone's heads. It was all about cognitive reframing, reminding him that being Athenian isn't about the physical walls. It's about that algorithm of freedom they built together. In the end, it worked. Athens didn't fall into anarchy. It actually upgraded its resolve. Watching those citizens head back to the Knicks to vote while the world was falling apart. Man, it reminded me of the NYC skyline during a blackout. Torches flickering everywhere, but the spirit, indestructible. We made that Athenian soul something that could survive the darkest days of any war. Pretty wild for a day's work, don't you think?
So it's 404 BC, right? The war's finally winding down, and honestly the whole world starts flickering on me. That deep blue of the Aegean? It's gone, replaced by these glowing lines of marble white code. The smell of the olive groves is getting thin, and the roar of the assembly just turns into this rhythmic digital hum. I knew it was time for my final act, the sleeper's signature. I headed down to the base of the Parthenon, right to those foundation stones I helped straighten out with all that optical logic. I had my final archive ready to go. Now, I wasn't going to use papyrus. That stuff's a joke. It burns, it rots, it's gone in a heartbeat. I needed something that lasts. So I went with the most durable thing the city had, Pentelic marble. In NYC, we know the best storage is the kind built right into the walls. I used a focused beam of sunlight and a nasty mix of vinegar and sea salt to do some molecular etching. I didn't write in Greek, though. I wrote in binary. Zeros and ones, baby. I etched the fundamental laws of physics, a digital map of the stars as they'll look in 2026, and the blueprint of the human body, making sure to include every detail, even su chemagen surasandaki sikinti. I left a message that only someone with a 21st century brain could ever decrypt. The Agora was the hardware. The vote was the flow. We were the architects of the open source. Don't let the tyrants crash the system. I sealed that stone and let it wait in the dark for 2,000 years. Then zap. The simulation just dies. Suddenly, I'm back in my Manhattan studio. No more marble dust, just the blue light from my dual monitors and the low, comforting hum of my Lenovo. I'm sitting in my chair, and the rumble of the subway and some siren out on Broadway reminds me I'm back in 2026. I'm Sleeper the historian again. I looked at my hands, clean as a whistle. No salt, no grit. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline, and it hit me. Manhattan is just the Athens of the future. The streets, the energy, the people. It moves exactly like the Agora I just finished programming. I hopped on my laptop and searched for Athens Archaeological Discoveries 2026. My heart nearly stopped. There was a breaking news report from yesterday, Saturday, April 4th. Researchers at the Parthenon found a hidden foundation block with these bizarre geometric etchings. They're calling it the source code of Western democracy. It worked. The bridge I built from those marble quarries to the heart of New York is holding firm. I didn't just study history. I became the ghost in the system that made sure its soul could be downloaded by the future. Manhattan's steel and glass? It's just the marble and bronze of a new empire. I closed my eyes, still tasting a bit of honey and olive oil, and started getting ready for the next jump.